All right, and we appear to be live. Um, I'm here with Mike Korn, aka Dr. Abnormality, which is what he goes by under Wormwood Chronicles. Um, Before we get underway, I got a notice from StreamYard when I signed on that they were having issues going live to Facebook. So I'm going to try to pop on over to Facebook and see if it's actually broadcasting live. Before we get too far, I'm not sure how I find that out, though. Um, if anybody is able to watch it, I'd probably put a post on here and see. Um, oh wait, it looks like it's going live. Yeah, we're live.
Whoopie.
Okay, we're live. All right, so we are here for starters to talk about Mike's stories in Spooky Stateline and also in Spooky Berwyn too, which came out in September. And so, why don't you pick one and go ahead and talk about that story a little bit, and then we'll go to the other one.
Well, the one in Spooky State Line. Now, I believe was that the one about um, you'll have to
The
refresh my memory on it.
the one in Walworth County.
Oh, about the Beast of Bray Road.
Yeah, that's it. I knew it was a B, but I couldn't remember.
Well, sure, yeah, that's a subject that interests me because I grew up in rural Boone County, only about a mile or so from the state line. So Bray Road was an easy distance, probably about a half hour away at the most. It's in the area. If anybody's ever been to like Alpine Valley Music Theater, it runs pretty close to that. So I had an interest in it, and by a coincidence, the person that is probably the most acknowledged expert on it, Linda Godfrey, passed away just like about a week and a half ago. Uh,
Exactly.
and she did more than anybody, way more than I did to publicize it. But it's an interesting story because the dogmen type creatures, werewolfish type creatures, were not a real big part of paranormal before the Bray Road stuff started popping up. And then it really took off. And some of the legends from other parts of the country, like in Ohio, they have what they call the Dog Man, the Ohio Dog Man. And there's others from Pennsylvania, Michigan, and all. But I think the Bray Road Beast got more publicity than any of them. So there's kind of an interest in investigating a incident that happened only like about a half hour, 40 minutes from where you live. Um, I've been on Bray Road, and there's nothing really ominous or disturbing about it. It's like a typical rural Wisconsin road, so you don't see menacing trees with Spanish moss and graveyards every few feet or Indian burial grounds everywhere. It looks pretty much just like the next road over. But for some reason, it became the epicenter of this big flap. Some people say werewolf. I don't know if I'd go that far, but um, it was an interesting subject to write about.
Now let me ask you because I edited your story obviously, and I looked it over when I was doing it, but it's been a little while and I've forgotten a lot of it. Was it one period of time, or were there several periods where that happened?
Well, that's an interesting subject because most of the stuff that started to flap happened in the 90s, like early 90s, maybe maybe late 80s or so. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon. But when you look at some of the books and research, and Linda Godfrey did a bunch of research, she found things going back quite a bit further. There were some incidents, let's say in southern Wisconsin, maybe not exactly Bray Road, going back. There was a flap in the 50s. I think there was some in the early 20th century. And then you go back to pioneer and even Indian times when it. So there is kind of a continuity to it. If you dig on it, you'll find more than just the recent cases.
Well, and if there's actually some kind of a real a creature there, and it's a would be probably more than one creature, you would expect that there would be some drift from one area to another over time because animals move around.
Well, it depends on how you look at this thing. If you take just the biological look at it, or the fact that it's some unknown species or unknown type of living animal, that would certainly be true. But there's a lot of aspects to this that are fairly supernatural or weird or out there. The same thing comes up with Bigfoot, because there's people who look at it strictly as a humanoid monster, like an undiscovered species. And anymore, the research seems to get stranger and stranger on it as they start looking into some of the more unusual aspects of the reports. And it's the same thing with the beast of Bray Road. For something as you would think that would be as ferocious and carnivorous as a large hybrid, a wolf and man or canine like type creature, there hasn't been, I won't say none. I don't think anybody has ever been killed by one, at least not that I can think of, not in 20th century and 21st century times. There have been some reports of animals that have been like livestock that's been preyed on, or animals that have been found savaged or torn apart. So it's not entirely, but you would think if it's a biological creature, there'd be more than one. And this would be a pretty hungry beast. You'd think there'd be a lot more bloodshed and animal carcasses and stuff than there is.
Well, yeah, and as far as animals, livestock, and stuff getting attacked, I mean, we do know for a fact there are bobcats around the area. Perhaps not a lot of them, but some, and they will attack livestock.
Well, it's not impossible that I mean, an even actual wolf has strayed far out of its territory because there are animals that stray. Cougars and puma are also known once occasionally to drift into these areas. And there was a eastern branch of the cougar that's been declared officially extinct for many, many years, decades. But with some of the eyewitness reports and things, you really wonder if it is extinct.
Yeah, and like there's supposedly officially wolves have never been in this area, or at least in recent times. They were years and years ago, but I know for a fact. I mean, it was when I was living in Roscoe. There was one night when right by the bedroom window there was a howl that I swear to God was not like any dog I'd ever heard before. I mean, it sent a chill down my spine. It was so loud, and it was what I swear a wolf sounds like. And both dogs started barking and growling. And I went outside. By the time I got outside to see what it was gone, but it was really, really large canine looking prints in the snow. So, I can't say for sure it was a wolf, but I've never heard a dog sound like that before.
Yeah, I myself have heard some pretty strange noises. I work like a real late night security job, and one night there was just a racket nearby that I've never heard anything like it. and I wouldn't say it's a wolf. It sounded like if a bunch of bobcats ran into a pack of wild coyotes
Oh
and
wow.
started tearing each other. I mean, it just froze me in my tracks. And it
Those
was
the coyotes. The sound of coyotes can be pretty creepy on their own sometimes.
they sounded different sometimes than you think they would sound. Uh, I was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I've been there a few times because it's a place I like to go. And by the cabin, there was a family of coyotes with little ones yipping and making noises. And it was a weird sound, but it wasn't like what you would normally think a coyote would sound like. And that was confirmed with the owner of the place where I was staying, the hotels. He says, "Oh, we've got them right here." So it was pretty well known that's what they were. But some of the howls, there have been people that have heard noises like that. But there's a lot of my philosophy is you got to look at the plausible stuff before you look at the implausible.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know that's always my philosophy as well. Look for the most obvious things and look for the things that are the most rational and scientifically founded explanations, and eliminate those before you go beyond.
And some of this is an incident that basically is heavily driven by anecdotes. There is some physical stuff that turned up, a few carcasses and things, but most of it is anecdotal evidence. And that's something, well, if there's enough of it, if there's enough smoke, there's fire. Um, but there have been some reports have been pretty not what you call not very sensational, and other ones have been really out there on that creature. I mean, they'll describe something that's no doubt it's like a humanoid that stands on two legs, like a real muscular guy with a wolf's head. Sometimes it even has like a necklace or something around its neck, or what you would think an Indian might wear and from past times might wear. It's a real range. Sometimes it's almost certainly would seem to be a misplaced wolf or even like a large feral dog. And then there's other ones, the more humanoid reports that are hard to reconcile. They're kind of hard to describe.
Well, and the problem you get into is, I mean, the least reliable thing there is the human brain and the human perception. I mean, as far as witnessing it, because this monkey brain likes to alter things, and you can only trust your eyes so much. And even pulling memories out, you can alter them as you relook at them. So that's one thing I tend to distrust more than anything, even with my own memory. It's like I don't really necessarily put a lot of credence into that.
It can happen, but a lot of times if you see something, when people in their lives see something very unusual, it tends to get burned into your head a lot more. I mean, if you're reporting on it maybe 40 years after the fact, yeah, but usually your relatively recent memories of something really strange or even traumatic are usually they're pretty close to what happened. And if you have enough people that have seen things in that manner, it adds up after a while. It's not something you could just brush under a rug.
Right. So now, how recent? Do you remember how recent the most recent reports of it there were?
Oh my goodness! I know that there's not been that many sightings recently that I can think of. I have to say I don't stay on it on top of it, super close, like weekly.
Yeah, I do know that you're very interested in cryptid stuff, though.
Yeah,
So
well, I am. The thing is I'm always looking for new ones and obscure ones, and from all over the world. For this area, southern Wisconsin and northern Illinois, is probably the biggest cryptid that we've ever had in this area. I can't think there's been a few scattered. Wisconsin, there has been. Well, one of the weirdest things in Wisconsin is they have a lot of kangaroo sightings. A
huh,
lot, a lot of phantom kangaroos, especially like around the Kenosha and
huh.
Waukesha areas. And it even includes photos, pretty good photos too. Uh, uh, just kangaroos hopping around the marshlands of Wisconsin. This is
If I recall correctly, Wisconsin is one of the states where you can own a kangaroo without having it licensed. I think so. Maybe they had some kangaroos escape.
Well, they had a. That's the first thing they always look for in all these cryptid reports going back even centuries. The first thing is, well, it escaped from the zoo, or it escaped from somebody's. Uh, I'd say 9 times out of 10, if not more, they find nothing is missing in the area. They look at zoos, and to have a menagerie, you have to pay a lot of money and jump through a ton of hoops if you're going to have strange animals. Um, and the kangaroo stuff, it goes back even into the 19th century.
Wow.
So it's peculiar. There have been ones seen in other parts of the country, but Wisconsin seems to be like a kangaroo capital. There's one time in downtown Chicago, a couple of police, they filed a report and everything. They had a tussle with one in the alley. It was jumping up and kicking them, and they didn't know what to do with a kangaroo stuck in an alley in Chicago.
Yeah, everybody thinks kangaroos are all nice and cute and all, but the Australians will tell you they're pretty vicious.
Well, the thing that I've always seen when I've seen them in the zoo is they're among the laziest animals in the world. I mean, I have only once have I ever seen them actually hop. They always seem to be lying on the ground, kind of scratching themselves with a paw, lounging around. So they don't seem to do any more than they have to. But I do know, and I just read this because on the Isle of Man, somebody many years ago they did let loose a bunch of wallabies, which
Oh
are
wow.
little kangaroos, and now they've become a permanent part of the Isle of Man, which is not really a good thing to happen. To have like a large strange species
Oh
run.
no, that's a bad thing to happen because there aren't any natural predators. And
Yeah, I think it's Isle of Man. I know it was like one of those English Channel islands had like a wallaby issue, but they know the source of it, so it's not a mystery.
right.
But yeah, the Beast of Bray Road is the king of Wisconsin cryptids, but the kangaroos come pretty close, and there's been a fair amount of Bigfoot or hairy hominid sightings. Sometimes not big, sometimes little. Um, and then you get weird reports that are just really out of left field. I mean, the biologists and zoologists, they tend to ignore things that don't seem real. But is it being fair to the witness to say, I mean, if you tested them for drugs or booze or that stuff, is it really being fair to say, well, you didn't see what you thought you saw because it couldn't possibly exist? Uh, this problem has been around for as long as there's been people. I remember when the first explorers came back from Australia and they brought the carcass of a platypus. And I forget which king it was. They brought it for the king, and he said, You're lucky I don't put you to death for trying to fool me with this silly thing. You sewed a duck bill onto a beaver and added stuff, and you're trying to tell me it's a real animal. And he says, You're lucky I don't have you hung. And he said, Honest, this is a real animal, and it lays eggs to boot. You know? If you didn't know what a platypus was and somebody described it to you, you wouldn't think it was a real animal. Same thing with an elephant. If you never saw one and somebody described one, you'd think it was the craziest thing in the world. So I don't dismiss these high strangeness reports where people see really bizarre and peculiar things. I don't want to. It's easy to say the pat answer is, well, they were on something, maybe sometimes they were. But if not, then, but yeah, Beast of Bray Road was that was one I had to do a little bit of writing about. And of course, I couldn't write something as in depth as what Linda Godfrey did.
Yeah, she did an entire book on it.
She did an entire book, and she often put it to other books because she branched out into writing about other cryptids. But she wrote a lot about ones in the Midwest. That seemed to be the base. So, yep, but if you ask about very recent sightings, I don't know of any in the last 5 years off the top of my head. It almost seems to be like something that is come and gone, like a flap, like the Murfreesboro mud monster in southern Illinois, where for 2 years it just burned up the news and everything, and then it wasn't seen anymore. So, yep, it's definitely a issue that's kind of close to home.
Yeah, that's definitely close to home. I've thought about taking a drive up there sometime and just looking around, but
it's a nice drive in the country, but during the day you won't see anything that peculiar or out of the ordinary. Almost all the sightings, a lot of them were at night. Not all. Well, there's quite a few during the day, but a lot of the dramatic ones were at night, and it might be a completely different situation then. I know we wound up one time. We were coming out of Alpine Valley, you and me, and we wound up getting stuck in the wrong road or something, and we were driving around for an hour up around there trying to get back on the big highway, and we went through some.
Well, I don't remember that. I remember going to.
Yeah,
I remember. Was that the show when we went to? It was Halford and some other bands, Iron Maiden maybe, and I remember there was a traffic jam, and we got stuck in traffic for like an hour.
The Ozfest we went up to was a huge day long event.
Oh yeah, that was wow. that was something.
That was the last time I've ever seen anything there. I mean,
yeah,
the area is so dead now. Unless you want to see Dave Matthews and
I don't think I've been there since either.
Yeah.
For those watching this who don't know, Mike and I also do a lot of collaboration on music writing stuff, and we're really Mike's one of my best friends in the world, so we've done quite a few shows together over the years.
Yeah. I imagine coming at 1 or 2 in the morning off around Alpine Valley and driving around there when you're bleary. You could be ready for anything.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, there's all those hills, and it's definitely very undeveloped.
Yeah. Which I kind of like driving around those places myself. I used to live way out on a gravel road, and I wish I could say that I saw or experienced something weird when I lived there because we had a big forest in back of us and to the west side of us and open fields around that, and it was very remote. But I saw some ordinary animals that were kind of rare, but I never saw or experienced anything bizarre or out of the ordinary, um, which is too bad when you come to think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I saw a dancing weasel one time on we had a big bay window that looked out in front of the valley with the creek running in front of it, and I walked out in the bay window. There was, I don't know whether you call it a marten, a weasel, a mink, or what, standing up in the window, and he was kind of like that, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at.
Wow.
Yeah, that was totally random.
That's crazy. Um, yeah, I don't, the thing with going out on country roads anymore at night, I don't know about you, but my eyesight isn't that good for driving at night anymore.
It's starting to be an issue, but I'm much more nervous about driving in a big city like Chicago or Milwaukee than I am about driving out in the country. I am getting so where I'd rather be beat with a stick than drive around Chicago at night. Uh,
At least the cities, you got lots of lights.
well, there is that. I'm trying to think. Well, something just it shows age is catching up with me. So kind of slipped my mind. Now the other book, the
Yeah,
Berwyn.
which I was going to say since you were talking about in the city of Chicago, that's a perfect tie-in for Spooky Berwyn 2 article. Your Spooky Berwyn 2 article.
Yeah, that was about the Chicago spooks, right?
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. There. Well, you could just touch on lightly on that because there are a lot of ghosts in Chicago, a lot of hauntings. So I focused on some of the more famous ones. Even just in the cemetery, like the Resurrection Cemetery, is a famous. That's a huge cemetery. Just that in itself could spawn an entire book, an entire large book.
I bet it has done that.
I'm sure it has. We went to Bachelor's Grove, and I just found a really, really excellent book about the subject, the most in depth that I've ever seen. It's called Haunted Bachelor's Grove by Ursula Bielski. I saw it at Barnes and Noble, and man, she covers that subject to, I mean, the history of it in just such minute detail.
I think I saw a copy of it at Wolf's Hollow, actually.
Very likely, very likely. I know the one I saw was at Barnes and Noble, and when I saw that, I pulled it out. It's not a real fat or thick book,
Right.
but it's sure packed with tons of information. Um, but when it comes to the article in Chicago, I know one of the subjects I wrote about was the Eastland tragedy,
Yes.
the boat, which it still blows my mind how that is not something that everyday people know about. Yet it seems to have been forgotten by history. It was a massive tragedy. Hundreds of people drowned when this boat capsized. And it's right around the area now, downtown, where Oprah has her headquarters and her studios. And I think they even there they've heard people crying for help from the river, heard screams and experienced like a lot of cold waves and
If
stuff.
if I remember right, her building was used as a temporary morgue. I
Yeah,
think
you're
during
right. You're right. That's exactly. They had so many bodies, they didn't have the places to put them.
right.
It was. Uh, it's hard to believe people being that negligent in this day and age. But back then, it's like there was no safety precautions taken. The boat was overloaded, and they had people rush to one side of it, and it just once it started tilting, that was it. And a lot of kids died, and those are the cries that are heard most often. Is children and even babies, because there was a disproportionate amount of kids on the boat. Excuse me. Um, that's one I wrote about. Then there was also the oh, I had such a long name. The Catholic school that burned in the late 50s and
Oh
killed.
yeah.
I think it was Our Lady of the Resurrection or Our Lady. My memory ain't what it used to be. I could probably find it here pretty
Let me look. I've got the book open right now
quick.
to your article.
It was one of the biggest school tragedies ever, um, in this country, really.
Oh, Our
But
Lady of the Angels. Our Lady of the
okay,
Angels,
all right,
and
yeah,
it was December 1st,
uh,
1958.
yeah. So you're talking about something that much closer. It's there's still people alive that remember that pretty well, and yeah, this spot is really haunted. I mean, a lot of times people can smell smoke where there is none, feel heat when there's no source of it, hear kids, hear clattering like walls being knocked down because the firemen did rescue quite a few of the kids. It wasn't a total massacre. There was a lot that died, but there were a lot who got away as well. And that really was a important case in fire safety. It revolutionized. After that, you had to have the alarms. You had to have the plans to escape, the fire escapes. Before that, it was very haphazard. Um, so it was something that was important not just to Chicago but the nation.
Yeah,
But
unfortunately, a lot of times it takes a tragedy like that to make the changes that are necessary to
it,
protect other people.
it sure does. And crazy things still happen. Remember, just a couple years ago, the building in Florida collapsed. A
Oh
big
yeah,
condominium. I'm sure that was put together about as slipshod as you could imagine.
yeah.
And Florida is notorious for lousy building codes
Well, yeah,
because
and they're notorious for not enforcing what codes they do have to.
yeah,
That
because
was,
they're
I think that was what they said. They said that a lot of times down there they were having inspections, and the inspections would turn up problems, but they never followed up to see if they fixed the problems. There was never any enforcement to make sure they fixed it.
well, I know there was tremendous damage caused by hurricanes, and
Yeah,
that finally tightened it up somewhat. But it's still known. I mean, when the developers run the politicians, you know,
exactly.
then you get the and they want to build, they want to turn everything into a concrete desert, down there. And this building, it was pretty amazing that was a third world incident, really,
Yeah,
that happened in the U.S. And so occasionally, unfortunately, from time to time, these things happen. I know there's been nightclub fires, some pretty bad ones, but the school safety, at least when it comes to fires, was improved tenfold after this incident. And I can't think of really recently any major school fires that have claimed they. Unfortunately, now we have the shooters
Yes, that's the bigger problem now.
who have replaced that, and they're slow to get on top of that. But the fire part seems most wise to be solved in this country, and a lot of it was due to that incident. But yeah, notorious for hauntings, for people that didn't even know what happened there, and that's what gives it a lot of credibility when people say, "What was with all the kids crying?" You know, or what's wrong with this? They didn't even know where they were at. They didn't know the history of the place. So that makes it when you get that. And then there's all the gangsterism that happened in the classical period, the 20 and 30s. Is
Right.
and, right now, gangsterism is worse in Chicago than it ever was. And
Different kind of gangsters, though.
yeah, well, it's they were pretty well armed back in the day with the Tommy guns,
Oh, yeah.
but yeah, it's weapons of war now. Um, but I just heard something today where they had a young actor that was kind of up and coming. He was shot last night in Chicago. He was like a part-time postal guy and a part-time actor. In his most recent role, he played a guy that got shot in the
Oh,
thing,
geez.
and it happened for real. And if it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to be in the south and west side of Chicago. So it'll be peculiar to me to see if 10 or 20 years down the line, if hauntings start to be reported in connection with the shootings and massacres that they have now. They did say that the notorious places like Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor homes had a lot of strange incidents
Didn't,
happen.
now they tore Cabrini Green down. Didn't they build condos there or something?
I think so. Yeah,
Wow.
it's been torn down quite a long time ago.
Yeah. And
Say,
I think they built luxury condos.
yeah, I can't confirm. I hate to speak off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
they built something that wasn't a project there. Uh,
Yeah.
Robert Taylor homes, I think they're still around. Maybe they tore those down too. But I remember driving around that area one time when I was took a wrong turn in Chicago, and I made haste to get out of there.
Yeah, I've been around. I made a couple wrong turns and wound up near Cabrini Green a couple times.
Yep, it'll be interesting to find out in the future if there's any sort of hauntings or supernatural events in connection with more recent
Yeah,
shootings.
the new version of Candyman actually takes place in where the Cabrini Green was torn down. Some of it does, and I'm not sure, but I think they actually filmed some of that on location. So maybe not all of it's been torn down. I think.
Well,
Because,
the original Cabrini, the original Candyman was very much
oh
set
yeah, yeah, and the
Cabrini.
remake, I think, or the not the remake, the sequel, I think was I know it was supposed to be in that area, and I think what it was some of the because Cabrini Green, everybody knows the big skyrise parts, but there were also smaller like little townhouse things and stuff. And those I think are still there. I don't think anybody lives. I don't think they're in use anymore. But I don't think a lot of them have been torn down. And I think they filmed some of it right there, if I remember right.
That
I
would be
just saw that a few months ago. But
if you're brave enough, that would be a good spot to investigate. Maybe if you were like a ghost hunter or something like
yeah,
that, because if because tragedies create ghosts for the most part. That's a corollary. You're very few ghosts are related to pleasant everyday incidents. Usually, it's some sort of sharp trauma that brings them around. But yeah, writing about Chicago ghosts, that would be the task of a lifetime,
Well,
really.
that's why, I mean, I keep putting, because the first Spooky Berwyn was strictly in the suburbs. Well, now with two, I decided, okay, we'll do Chicago as well. And, I sent a signed copy to Sven Gulli. And in my autograph to him, I said, you know what? There are plenty more stories to tell. I'll keep putting these books out and sending them to you as long as you keep doing the show. How's that for a deal? And, so, and I mean, because there are so many stories that I can do a million of these books and not touch all the stories.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing you got to keep in mind, those are just the incidents that people report.
Oh yeah,
The vast majority of strange incidents go unreported.
and by the way, just as long as you're mentioning that, for anybody who's watching this, if you're in one of the areas that I cover and you've got a story that nobody knows about, talk to me. You can write it up. You can tell me about it. I'll write it up. But I'd love to have those kind of stories too, the ones that nobody's heard about. And especially, I love personal encounters, getting that little personal side point of view on it.
Yeah, it's hopefully you'll get somebody that'll bite on that. I,
Yeah.
I know I always said if I ever saw a UFO or a strange creature or anything like that, and I didn't have anybody to back me up or I couldn't record any of it, I would have to think very long and hard before I ever told anybody. And I think that's the way it is in general.
Well,
Uh,
you've got the first Spooky Rockford book, right? You've got a copy of that.
yep, I got it.
And you know that Strange Lights of Rockford, Illinois article about the UFOs?
Uh-huh.
The last part of that was purely fiction, but everything else up to there was either taken from MUFON reports, and I changed some names. I might have augmented some of the stuff to make it fictionalized. I changed a few dates to make it all fit into the narrative. But the one character in there, Wayne Phil, that was actually me. And all the things that I reported in there by Wayne Phil were things I actually saw. But I put it under a pseudonym. So,
Well, that's a lot of people are careful. I always remember with Bob Gimlin, who was part of the famous Patterson Gimlin Bigfoot thing. I always asked him in years. He said, "I wish I never said a damn thing." You know, he said it ruined my life for the most part of it. And he says that if Roger made any money off, I think he made some. It didn't do him much good. He was dead by 75 or 76, and same thing with the the two fellas down in Mississippi,
oh yeah, yeah.
Pascagoula with the UFO sightings. That they said, "We wish we never said anything about it."
Well, now the one thing about UFOs is I think with the United States government opening up this new stuff and being a lot more open about it, I think that a lot of the bad attitude towards UFOs, I think it might become a lot more acceptable now to have UFO stories.
Well,
Um,
one guy that really broke the stigma was Jimmy Carter.
right, right. I remember that because he had seen a UFO and he talked about it.
Yeah, yeah. He broke the stigma on it for a lot of people. I think it's hard to tell what you're going to get from the government with because they misdirect.
Oh yeah, and a lot of times they do that intentionally because there are things that are perhaps the national security secrets, and they will misdirect to keep from getting the real information out there. Which I mean, obviously they have to do that. You can't put your secret weapons out there for everybody to know about. So because otherwise they're not secrets anymore and they're not as useful. So there has to be some of that. Plus, I think to some degree, if there were some huge threat from outer space, I think that, you know, to some degree, it would be their duty to try to keep people from panicking. And if that means lying, they would probably have to do that.
Yeah, and there's a lot that we won't know, and you just kind of grasp at straws.
But I do think that they're trying to be more open about it than they used to. I mean, the
Or
very fact,
the appearance being more.
right? I mean, the very fact that the United States Air Force literally said, "Look, we've got all these cases here. We know what a big chunk of them are, but there are these right here. We have no idea what they are." And the very fact that they even said that tells me it's more open than it used to be. It's way more open than Project Blue Book ever was.
Other countries also are. Italy is known for having a very open attitude on this subject now, and it used to be quite the opposite because they would tamp down stuff on it very quickly.
Well,
Uh,
I've often thought, and whether I'm right or wrong, I've often had a theory that something as momentous as encounters with aliens from other worlds would shatter society in a lot of ways if it came out all at once. And I've often thought that there might be some sort of a conspiracy to, rather than hide it all forever, to just gradually let little bits of it come out, let the public get accustomed to it, and then put a little more later. I've always wondered if maybe that's the strategy in use.
I tell you, when I started reading John Keel's stuff, he makes you think about these subjects in a completely different way. And some of it is quite disturbing when you get into it. Um, I always, I don't want to go out on a limb. I always have my own theories on it. Of course, you can break. There's no one answer that describes everything. For
Right.
for one thing, I think there's actual physical phenomena behind this stuff like ball lightning or strange physical effects is responsible for a lot of it.
You,
Uh,
you made me laugh with ball lightning. Have you watched the Osbournes show with Sharon and Ozzy and Jack showing them all the video?
I try to avoid it like the plague.
I think it's really funny, and the reason ball lightning made me laugh is I can't tell you how many times they'll see a video and Ozzy will say it's either double exposure or ball lightning. He's always coming up with ball lightning.
Well, a lot of people do. They
Yeah,
use that as and there's spook lights all over the world. I mean, up in Wisconsin around Rhinelander, there's a lot of spook lights. There's the Marfa spook lights in Texas, Brown Mountain in the Carolinas and the Appalachians. Uh, it's some natural weirdness that nobody has a perfect explanation for, but there's no doubt that it exists. I mean, if anybody tries to tell you that it's swamp gas, or a reflection of car lights coming off of a cloud, or so the rational explanations for a lot of these things are more ridiculous than they
well,
know.
well, like I remember. Okay, one of them, like I said, the things in Spooky Rockford that I actually saw, and I saw these multiple times. This was the year that everybody was seeing all the UFOs, and you would see there would be like one light in the sky, and all of a sudden it would split into two, and then those would split, and all of a sudden you've got five of them, and they're moving in different directions, and then maybe one would shoot off really fast in one direction, and a little while another one would shoot off in another direction. I saw these things multiple times that year, and I remember the Register Star ran an article that said, okay, we know what it is now. It's some people with a hot air balloon dangling flashlights from it. I'm like, no, that is absolutely not what that is.
I always heard it was people setting up like candles on balloons and
Yeah,
stuff. Some of that did happen
right. I'm sure some of it did, but
because I know somebody who did it. But one explanation fits all. To me, that doesn't work for anything.
Well, the only one, and I know you and I have talked about this privately before. The only one that would explain all of it is the whole alternate universe in somehow impeding on our own.
That's what I believe they are. I don't think they're from outside. I think they're from alongside. I think that
Yeah,
I think that explains not just UFOs,
it
but
explains everything.
explains everything. The fairies.
Yeah,
You know that they have once you start taking religion and stuff out of that, every report of fairies and that sort of stuff is exactly similar to aliens and so-called UFO reports. It's like something that lives alongside what we think the real world is.
right.
It's not maybe here. Also, I think there's a lot of things with the nature of time that people don't people think time is perfect, and a lot of times they'll use the analogy time is like a river. Well, if time is like a river has backwash, it
Yep.
has eddies, whirlpools, strange currents. That's that's what ghosts or even the sightings of like sea monsters and Bigfoot and stuff like that,
Dragons.
where they seem to be, there, but they disappear in the next book. It's like something that winks in and out, a time or maybe another reality where these creatures never became extinct. You know,
Yeah, I mean, the alternate universe theory. By that theory, there are there's an infinite number of alternate universes out there, and
quantum physics supports this
oh,
theory.
absolutely, absolutely, quantum physics 100% supports that. Which is, I was very much a skeptic in that theory until quantum physics came out and said, no, actually, that makes sense. And so now that's kind of what I believe is probably true.
The ancient mystics were on top of it well before any of the scientists were. The old Buddhists knew exactly what they were talking about, where they talked about different levels to reality. And, and it might be possible just through mental abilities and mental concentration to look past a lot of this stuff. But it's studied a lot more than it used to be, and sometimes seriously, but not enough. It's not studied enough because it'll always have the stigma around it, and that'll never be gotten rid of. And
No,
and there is everyday real scientific explanations to a lot of this stuff.
oh yeah,
So
absolutely.
some of the cryptids are definitely real animals. Uh, the panthers that they see over in England all the time, and the countryside, they exist. The thylacine reports in Australia and New Zealand. Well, the thylacines were alive 100 years ago, and they were canny and smart animals. It's not outrageous to think that they, escaped extinction. Uh,
And then remember, there was one I remember a while ago where somebody had pictures of some kind of really strange looking animal, and they managed to get some hair from it, and they got it to a science lab, and it was analyzed, and it turned out to be a wolf. But they said that the reason it looked so odd was it probably had mange. And but then the funny thing was, once the lab analyzed it and came out with it being wolf, whoever had turned it in, as I recall, was like, "Oh well, we probably got the wrong hair then," because they weren't willing to admit it was a wolf with mange.
well, the wolf or coyote or dog with mange, that's a very common method of explaining chupacabra.
Oh yeah,
That's a matter of fact, it's become a very pat explanation to explain all of the the stories, and a lot of times it's true because an animal with mange will look pretty strange.
Yeah, that's for sure.
There's one time I saw a bear with hardly any hair on it, and if you were driving at night and saw this creature, I mean, your mind would flip if you saw that, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a famous case. They have the White River in Arkansas, and there's a river monster called Whitey that has haunted it, you know, for a long time, and people will see it. Well, they finally figured out what it was:
What was it?
an elephant seal that
Oh,
had become way lost and stuck in the river.
oh
Now,
wow.
if you were out fishing on a southern river and you saw an elephant seal would not pop into your head.
No.
Monster would pop into your head.
Well, and it's like sometimes people just want to see things too. Like I was watching, I don't know if you ever watched this, but I like to watch that paranormal caught on tape once in a while. And mainly because some of it is complete BS, but then once in a while I'll see something and I'll be like, "Whoa, what is that?" That if that's legitimate and not a hoax, somebody got something really interesting there. Well, last weekend I think it was, I saw some video some lady captured on Loch Ness, and she's like, "Oh, it's this big creature." Well, from what I saw of the video, it looked like a school of fish coming up to the top and sort of jumping out of the water. It looked like independent things, not one big thing. And she's like, "They're moving together." I'm like, "No, they're not. You want to believe they are, but they're not."
Yeah, well, there's a lot of stuff at Loch Ness that can happen. Although one thing about a lot of people don't realize about the Loch is it's over 50% dead.
Yeah, if there was ever anything living in there, it's not there anymore. There wouldn't be enough to feed it.
It's there's something in the lake. The most recent evidence, and they tested the water and they found a huge amount of eel DNA in the water. Now there are certain types of eels that if they don't have sexual maturity, they will continue to grow. And so a giant eel in Loch Ness is not an implausible thing. I also thought, you know, a sturgeon can grow to be enormous and they live a very long time. 150 years is not unknown for a large. They caught a sturgeon in the Volga River in Russia that weighed over 3,000 pounds.
Whoa.
And you know, if you could just imagine one of these characters, they're very sluggish on the bottom, and it's a very deep lake, and probably maybe even,
700 feet deep, yeah.
but well, it's deeper than the ocean in many places. It's over 900 feet deep, which is incredibly deep for a lake. But you could just imagine one of these things laying around in the bottom, and once in a while comes up to the top. And, but there is something in the lake. There's too much there for there not to be. If you had to prove in a court case that there was something large and unusual in the lake, it would be an open and shut case. Especially when you look at sonar, which is not going to sonar is not going to be fooled. I
I wonder,
mean,
have they sent divers down?
well, not 900 feet. No,
Uh,
I mean, the lake is so clogged with peat that the visibility, unless you have very strong lights, the visibility is worthless. I mean,
okay.
it's a very strange place. I mean, it's full of peat and it is enormous. It's a long, wide, deep lake, and it could be connected to other nearby. You know, Loch Ness is far from the only lake that's reported a monster in Scotland. I mean, there's a Loch Morar is another one that's had a lot of sightings over the year. The River Ness runs past a lot of the locks, and there's probably underwater caves that might connect things. That also would be a shelter for any sort of large animal. One thing I'm 100% sure that it's not a dinosaur or
No.
a plesiosaur type creature. That would be something that would require an enormous amount of food to keep it going. And I would think over the thousands of years of history, somebody would have been eaten,
Yeah.
because a plesiosaur is not a pleasant animal to be stuck in the water with. Uh, so that although they did just discover that there is a type of plesiosaur that did live in fresh water, and
Oh.
and before they thought it was always a saltwater exclusively creature, but they found now that there's one that can live in fresh water. Not that I think that's what this is,
Right. Right.
but yeah, there is something in the lake. Whether it's what size it gets, is 100 feet or 80 feet long? No, I don't think so. 20, 25 foot? Yeah, I think there's plenty of room
Yeah,
for
and
the.
like you said, if there are caves, a lot of types of fish and underwater creatures love to hide in caves.
Yeah, yeah, and there are they have found them. Although, well, this could go on. I don't want to drag it on, but there's been so many reports, Loch Ness, where it's different. The very earliest reports, it came onto the land a couple of times. One of the earliest witnesses was an old couple driving along the road, and they saw it crossing the road in front of them, and that was a peculiar. It doesn't really jibe with the other reports. And there was another guy that was working on an underwater salvage mission. A boat had sunk in the loch, and it was on a kind of a ledge of stone. And he was down there working in a scuba. He was in a scuba suit. He looked and he saw something like almost like an enormous frog watching him. Just
Wow.
kind of, I would have passed out. I mean, really, I'm not afraid of any animal on the land at all, hardly, if I can see it in front of me. But if I'm in the water and something bumps into me, I'll freak out completely. I mean, that's something that gives me a there's a reason for that, but I don't want to drag it into this any longer than that. But the whole history of Loch Ness reports, the creature seems to be almost like a chimera, where it resembles a lot of different things. But I'm pretty confident that it may very well be extinct or very close to it. But there's been a rash of sightings in the last few years that have kind of revived people's hopes on it. But I would say an enormous eel or a big old sturgeon that only comes up once in a while, I would say that's not an implausible thing. And then there's some people that go in for a supernatural explanation because, you know, your old pal, Mr. Crowley, had
Yeah.
one of his houses with a lot of magical stuff going on in there for many, many years. And it seemed that almost to the minute when he arrived with his cult on there, the sightings took off. And I always thought that was kind of peculiar. That some people say, well, it was something that Crowley and his boys called up out of the deep or from somewhere else. That's interesting. You can't prove or disprove it, but it's kind of an interesting view of it. But yeah, that's one thing, and kind of bringing it back around to what we originally spoke of. In Illinois, there's not. not an awful lot of cryptids in Illinois, except for the mud monster, the flap down south, and a lot of thunderbirds have been spotted in Illinois.
There was one I wrote about where there have been skinwalkers, or I don't know how to pronounce it, Nimerigar, that were reported in Cedarville, Illinois.
Now that's a new. Now that's something I'll have to look up because that's a new one on me.
Yeah, I did an article about that in Spooky Stateline. There weren't a ton of sources on it, but I found enough to write up an article on it, and
Well, that's
so
interesting. I'll have to see that. But yeah, there's nothing, no water creatures in Illinois hardly that I could think. But Wisconsin has several.
well, Wisconsin seems to be more of a water state.
Well, more, yeah. Some of the northern lakes have had pretty
I mean,
frequent reports.
Illinois, you've got Lake Michigan, and you've got lakes, but really Lake Michigan's the main one that
That's the
comes to
main.
mind.
Yeah, that's the main
We're
one.
not we're not real lake heavy like Minnesota and Wisconsin are.
No, that's true. I mean, there's a fair amount of small ones, but I mean,
Right,
the big ones where you could go out in a boat for a few hours and something like that. That's more Wisconsin or Michigan has a bunch.
right.
But yeah, so there's a kind of an inexhaustible amount of stuff to write about. Uh,
Yes, and that's why I'm going to keep doing these. And
well,
I,
I'll
I'm willing to keep having you contribute anytime you want to, Mike.
I'll give you a heads up on one that's going to appear at Wormwood. I just wrote something on some of the major spooks of southern Illinois,
Oh, okay.
and that'll go up not real soon because I've got actually a pretty good glut of material right now. Um, but that'll go up eventually, and that might be something you might want to use.
Okay,
Uh,
and for those who are unfamiliar, Mike, under the name Dr. Abnormality, runs Wormwood Chronicles, which is wormwoodchronicles.net. You can also find it on Facebook.
Yep. So that'll be popping up. I write about the old slave house, one of the most haunted houses in the country. Um, Also do about the curse of Kaskaskia and the Phantom Funeral Procession at Fort de Chartres, which I've actually been to down in southern Illinois. That's kind of one of the cooler ghost stories around. But that'll be coming up. So uh, we'll probably should do one of those, do one of these again maybe someday.
Yeah, we can do that. I always glad to do one of these with you, Mike. And maybe we should do one to just talk about Wormwood sometime. That would be fun. I mean, and for those who don't know, Wormwood has Mike does his Wormwood files, which are the supernatural sort of and encrypted kind of articles, mysterious things. But there's also coverage of music, which I write some of those reviews. You got movies, which I write some of those reviews. Wrestling articles, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
It's a nice cornucopia, kind of an eclectic mix of things.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the plug there. I sure appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's and it's you know what the one thing about Wormwood, it's very much you. It's the things you're interested in.
Pretty much. That's the way it started out, and of course, I like being able to get other people's input into it because I don't think of it as a blog at all.
No,
I,
it's not. It's a website. It's sort of what I consider music. I consider Music Street Journal a publication, like a magazine, and I think of Wormwood very much the same way.
yeah, it's a fanzine is what
Yeah. Well, in fact, it started as print. I remember writing for the print edition, and I
uh,
still have some copies.
I do miss doing that. It was kind of a pain, but everything that I put online, I envision it how it would look if it was in print. But it's just a bit too much, and the advertising isn't there. I wouldn't charge for it. I would only do it if it would be freely available. And there's some shops that come to mind, but it's at the rate that like record and bookshops and stuff like that are going out of business. Uh, that's where you get your support from.
Yeah, exactly.
But
In Rockford, they tend to come and go pretty quickly, other than some that wind up having longevity, but a lot of them just come and go pretty quickly.
Culture Shock is done really
Yeah,
well.
and obviously Toad Hall.
Toad Hall is done pretty good. The Top Cut Comic Shop.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a place now called Matt's Basement that's pretty good.
And as far as bookstores, let's plug Maze Books, which
Yeah,
he's growing. He's growing, and he's doing well so far. So let's hope he's one of them that has a lot of longevity too.
yeah, I sure do. I should go back down there pretty soon.
I mean, I think Dave and Kim both are very much into books, and you can tell, and into literature, and it really shows. And they've got such an eclectic mix of books in the store as well.
They got some cool old paperbacks, whether it's the
Oh
70s
yeah,
sci-fi paperbacks. I so much prefer that era to what's doing now. With
yeah,
every book is like 800 pages and it's part of a series of 10. All that
I know.
stuff. It's people don't have an editor no more because they don't want an editor. They
Right.
want to churn out as much stuff as they can. I used to pick up, those paperbacks and you'd be done reading them in 2 days of 200, 250 pages. Those were some of the best books out there.
Oh yeah.
But, well, we better probably put a lid on it.
Yeah. So for those who are interested, again, we were talking about Spooky Stateline,
Yep.
and we were talking about Spooky Berwyn too. Now, both of those books can be gotten at lulu.com/spotlight/strange sound. You can also get them if you go to GaryHillAuthor.com and go to the Tales of Wonder and Dread page. You'll find them, links to them there, but they'll take you to Lulu where you can buy them. So anything you'd like to add, Mike?
No, not really. I've probably blown enough hot air for the day.
All right, buddy. We'll sign off then. Thanks, everybody, and talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you.
Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.